What is the most F-up secret someone close has confessed to you? Share yours in the comments. Let's dive in. Story 1. Her brother had attacked her, got her pregnant, and she had an abortion at the age of 13 to 14 years old. She told me this at her birthday party where a group of her friends, me included, stayed at her house, and guess who was there having just gotten out of prison? But in better news, she grew up, got herself out of poverty, got into shape, and is now a doctor. Story 2. I once went to a barbecue hosted by parents, we will call them Tim and Carol, of one of my son's classmates. They were in grade 3 at the time. It was a no-kid barbecue, a get-together for all the parents to meet and get to know each other. I had already known the hosting couple casually from the school for the last 2 years. We had been friendly and chatty, but not friends as such. As the night wore on, more and more folks got drunker and rowdier. I'm not much of a drinker, so had sat on a chair on the patio watching the fun. Tim sat next to me, fairly drunk, as started to say what a nice person I was, and what a pity I was single. I began to brace myself for a drunken proposal. But boy was I wrong as to where this conversation went. Tim said to me I had always treated him and Carol kindly, and that he wishes he had a friend like me. I'm feeling uncomfortable, and was looking for an excuse to leave, when out of nowhere he said he had a confession to make. I was now getting up and looking to leave. He stopped me and said that he had to tell me his secret. When he was 19, he had murdered his stepfather after he had hit his mom one too many times. He went into a few specifics of what he did with the body, and for the last 16 years, everyone knew that the stepfather had run away. No one suspected that he had murdered him. I just sat there. What the hell do you say to that? Did some digging and asking around, and the widely accepted story is the stepfather had just disappeared one day in the middle of the night, leaving every belonging behind. Mom and sister say the stepdad must have run away. Don't think they have any idea of the truth. So what did I do after he told me? I was blindsided, and my brain was trying to understand what was said. I just said that sounds awful, and up and left. Saw him at school on the following Tuesday, and he seemed to not remember. Clarity. He never mutilated the body, etc., rather just how he got it out the house, and where he dumped it, etc. Also, the mom and sister seemed to have no idea. They think the stepdad just left. I think they were far too relieved to ask any questions. Did I go to the cops? No, I had spent enough time around this family, Tim, his mom, and sister too, to see that they were good people but definitely had residual trauma. Tim was a very outspoken advocate for women and children. I had heard stories in the talks he gave of what abuse his mom, Tim, and sister had suffered. The abuse was awful, and I can see how a 19-year-old kid would reach a snapping point of feeling helpless one too many times. And while I don't advocate murder or vigilante behaviors, I do have empathy, and I can also understand how something like this could happen, and how if I was in that situation of fear, pain, and absolute hopelessness, perhaps I would do something similar. In all the years since, I have never known him to be anything but kind and loving to his family. He physically and financially takes care of his mother and sister. Oh no, I'm not a judge and jury. I made the decision I wasn't going to ruin lives that were already suffering. Am I in danger? No, this happened many years ago. Our kids have graduated high school now. Do I think he was lying? Of course, there is always that possibility, but judging from every interaction I had with him before and after, I don't think so. He was never a boaster and was always pretty humble, even regarding his wealth and accomplishments. Also, this is South Africa. Cops aren't interested in an old case. Hell, most aren't interested in an ongoing crime. Getting rid of bodies here isn't something terribly hard to do. I love my country, but our police force is woefully undertrained, grossly underpaid, and very understaffed. Resources are lacking too. Not totally unusual to hear of a station with no water or electricity. Many have only one working vehicle per 3 to 4 on-duty cops. The list goes on. I must have a tell me your secret face, as I have been told some real doozies by people, some virtual strangers in my life. Story 3. When I was a kid, my uncle had 2 dogs which his wife disliked. Eventually one of their sons developed a mild allergy to dogs, and they agreed that the dogs would go. She was supposed to advertise to find a new home for them. At a family gathering, while the women were all in the kitchen, she told us, with laughter, that that was too much trouble. She'd actually taken the dogs to the pound, and had lied to him that she'd found a home for them. She seemed to think she'd pulled off some feat of cleverness. She looked very proud of herself. Nobody else really said anything. Story 4. My ex and I were together for a long time and have 4 kids, teens now. We spent a lot of time arguing. I've never argued as much with anybody in my entire life as I have with him. Everything I said, or did, or thought seemed to be wrong in his eyes. At first I thought he was just giving honest, constructive criticism, and this was an opportunity for me to grow and improve, so I took his feedback seriously and tried to work on any issues he raised. Over time, I realized that once I corrected something, he'd argue that I should do it differently, the way I used to do it. When I brought this up to him, he denied that he ever said that, or that I ever used to do it that way in the first place, which would eventually cause me to doubt my own memory. Gaslighting, basically. Eventually I gave up trying to make him happy because it was impossible. He argued passionately that it was not. I accused him of just loving to argue, which he vehemently denied. By that point I was an insecure, emotional mess. We ultimately went our separate ways, as much as we could while co-parenting our kids anyway. But for many years afterward, he would still find something to argue about every time we saw each other, which was often, and I was constantly stressed and agitated because of it. Just seeing his number on the caller ID would set my teeth on edge, because what the fuck is he going to start an argument about now? Recently, he came over to spend time with the kids. They were in the living room talking and hanging out for a couple of hours. Eventually they all drifted away to play video games or talk to each other elsewhere in the house. I was doing dishes, and he and I started talking about how one of the kids wanted to join the debate team and would probably be pretty good at it. He offered his thoughts about how to best win a debate, and the brief conversation that followed blew my fucking mind. Debating is really enjoyable, and the crazy thing about it is that you don't have to believe in what you're saying in order to win. I was explaining that to Son, that you don't get to just pick the side of the debate that you agree with. The point is to learn how to argue successfully from any side. I was telling him that I do that all the time for the fun of it and to keep myself sharp. But the main reason is just that I want to win. What do you mean? Well, I don't necessarily believe in whatever argument I'm making. A lot of times I just pick whichever position I think has the best chance of winning and then argue it like I really believe in it. So, when you're arguing, sometimes you're arguing for a point that you don't even support or believe in. I don't really care if it's my argument. I just need it to be the winning argument. I'm always competing in everything that I do. And I want to win. You mean on a debate team? Or do you mean in real life? Well, I was never on a debate team, so of course I'm talking about real life. Surprised you don't know this about me after 20 years. I've always done that. So when we were together, were you doing that with me? Starting arguments you didn't even believe in just for the sake of arguing and winning? Looking vaguely bored. Yes, that's what I'm saying. I like to argue and win. It doesn't matter if I'm right. Just that I win. I just stood there staring at him in silent horror. The countless long nights of passionate arguments, the years of endless criticisms, the times it escalated to shouting and crying and cursing and throwing things, the impact it had on our children, the total mindfucks he did on me, the way I worked so hard and so pointlessly to be better. And now he's telling me it was all because he just likes to argue and be contrary because it's a fun little competition to him. That shit literally cost us our relationship, the nuclear household he claimed to want so badly, and caused so much stress and emotional turmoil. What the actual F? I haven't looked at him the same since then. I still almost can't believe that conversation was real. It's one of the most incomprehensible things I've ever heard. Story 5. My former boss and close friend at the time admitted to having an ongoing sexual relationship with his adopted daughter. They adopted her at age 14, and he contends that nothing sexual happened before she turned 18, as if that makes it much better. But that timeline never added up to me. I'm pretty sure it started when she was 16 to 17. The adopted girl took the brunt of the blame, got kicked out of the house, while she was still 18, I believe, and he and his wife are still married, living in the same house. We're no longer friends. To respond to the girl getting the blame, the wife accused the girl of seducing her husband. The wife might have been more a piece of shit than him. To conclude, I eventually left the company. I could not trust or respect him after this. I've had several run-ins with his wife over the years, ranging from her disdain towards me to flat-out accusing me of ruining his company and their family. I ended up moving around and up in the industry we were in, and now making twice as I was back then. I saw the girl once, several years ago, but didn't get a chance to talk to her. I hope Lori is doing well. Story 6. My best friend in high school got really weird during a funeral we attended, very much borderline hysteria. I convinced her that we could leave. I thought grief was overwhelming her. Better to leave, right? Well, we climb into the car, and as I'm turning on the radio, she starts fake laughing. Obviously fake laughing. My mom said once that if you feel bad, you can trick yourself into being happy. She uttered another fake peal of laughter, like a dolphin's cackle. That's what I did last night, thinking about James. James was the departed, her family's longtime friend. I sat there, feeling the undercurrent swirl. She was about to tell me something horrible, so I braced for it. He used to fuck me when I was younger. James, she clarified. My mom knew. It was better that he did it than some other guy back where we lived when I was a kid. 'Cause he cared. She gave a little dip of her head. It was a gesture of pleading. She wanted me to agree that this was so. Dude, I said. We were 16. How young was she, I wondered. But she wasn't done. I wasn't even sad. I was like, I don't know, really actually mad. And I got Bucky to get up behind me, and he went in. And you'd think that it would be gross, but it wasn't. I froze. Bucky was her Akita. For years later, my then husband admitted he used to fuck his mare. When people admit their dark fears and secrets to you, that's good mostly. It means good things about your personality and how you make people feel. But I've had two people that I cared about deeply confess bestiality to me. What reaction either of them expected, I don't know, but my female buddy. Revenge dog fucking to deal with her sanctioned molestation, an essay, by the guy I'd known as Laughing in Sunshine Y, for as long as I'd known her. There are few feelings that have no name. The rush of quasi-repulsed grief for childhood, and the knee-jerk reaction to laugh to cover my confusion. I'll never forget it. Interstate Love Song was on the radio. Some boy was gliding through the parking lot on a skateboard, lanky graceful. And here's my friend, with faked glee again on her face, and a speck of the abyss cracking in her eyes. Story 7. When I was around 14, I was hanging out with my boyfriend after school, and we'd been having a great time watching funny videos. Started hearing sirens periodically in the distance, and he said he'd better get going. I asked why, and he tells me something like, I better make sure they haven't found her. I asked what he meant, and he told me his mother wasn't going to let him come over because he hadn't done his homework, so he pushed her down their apartment stairs, which broke one of her legs. He stepped over her and out their front door, shut and locked it behind him, and left her bleeding and screaming with bones sticking out of her leg, so he could visit me. He was so calm and happy, even when telling me this, that no one ever would have suspected he'd done a damn thing. He tells me he left her there to die so he didn't have to worry about getting permission anymore, tells me he loves me, hugs and kisses me goodbye and starts walking home. I didn't see him for a few years because he was arrested on the walk home and spent some time in jail. She lived by the way. As an adult, a childhood friend of mine told me she knew her current relationship was failing and started venting about how he kept threatening to leave her after their major fights, how she caught him talking to other women on dating apps, and he'd recently smashed their TV during an argument. A couple days later I was visiting while she babysat some kids, and he happened to get home from work early. Next thing I know, she's got his shotgun out of their bedroom and is waving it around at him and past the kids, fully loaded, and they're both screaming at each other as he keeps telling her to put it down and asking if she's crazy. A few days later she told me she'd found a solution, and a baby would fix this. I'd been pointing out all the abuse, toxicity, etc. going on from the start, so to say I was flabbergasted was an understatement. Told her right away a baby fixes nothing and will only make everything worse and 10 times more stressful. They could barely take care of the son she already had at that point, and part of their fights stemmed from money issues and struggling to pay rent. She seemed to agree after talking for hours and having a few other friends tell her similar things. A couple months go by, and I get a call that it worked. What worked? She'd poked holes in all of their condoms with a sewing pin and got pregnant. It didn't take long before he almost strangled her to death, and their relationship ended. Story 8. In my town while growing up, there was a man who I heard about and knew, who was 13 years older than me when I was in high school. He had a solid reputation as a piece of shit drug dealer. He sold and gave away Xanax, hard drags and other stuff to people, oftentimes specifically to get them hooked, so he'd have more customers or women to sleep with. And for some reason he decided to make all of his business at my school from 2 towns over. This guy has killed people. He looks and acts the part of somebody who is going fucking nowhere in life, and I wouldn't judge you for thinking that the world would be a better place if he were dead. I thought/think the same. But despite that, back then I used to hang out with him every once in a while, and one time I asked him why he is the way he is, and why he doesn't try to change. And he told me, once you start digging that hole, after a while it becomes too deep to get out. And my first reaction was to get pissed off at this motherfucker for saying he had given up while he is still drawing breathe in front of me. He knows how bad of a person he is, and he showed a desire to want to be better. But somewhere along the line he convinced himself it wasn't possible, and lived for years in that cloud of bullshit, continuing to ruin young people's lives as far as I'm aware. If someone had helped him earlier, or if he had helped himself more, shit would have been different. But that's the way it is. So I can't think like that. If I ever do find out I'm dying of some fatal disease, though, I'm making a list and checking it twice just to make sure he's on it. Story 9. Don't know if it's the most shocking secret, but the most recent secret that's been let slip anyway. My 25 female, Nan 73 female, accidentally told me about how my mom, 52 female, disappeared for 2 weeks a few months after I was born. She just up and left one day, didn't tell anyone where she was, just that she wasn't coming back. She of course came back and apologized to my dad, 52M. They divorced 7 years later, no shock there. Not angry that she left, angry she came back. Horrible, disgusting thing to think, I know, but she was never mentally stable enough to have children, and she made the conscious choice to have 2. It was selfish. I love her, but I was her parent more than she was mine. Edit. I'm getting a lot of comments about how I should cut her slack because she was probably hit with postnatal depression. I understand that completely. I just didn't know that this is when she started to spiral out. I thought it was either when my brother was born or when the divorce happened, but it just unlocked a whole load of toddler crazy memories. So it just hurt that almost everyone let it go on my entire life, not just a part of it. So before people also bring my dad into this, after the divorce he tried to get custody of me and my brother, then tried again after she was committed for the second time, but he had no money, so that's how that went. My dad told me that she wouldn't let us go because she couldn't bear to be away from us, and that he understood that, just would always hate her for it. It also sucks realizing how different your life could have been if the woman that loves you more than life wasn't so selfish. My brother knows nothing about the custody thing. He already has no relationship to my mother. My family is super messed up. Story 10. My former mother-in-law, in her early 50s at the time, suddenly had a friend who was slightly older than me, around 30 years old. I had just returned from a vacation with my ex, and we were a bit surprised by this new friendship. The friend originally came from the capital of the country where I live, but had moved about 100 kilometers away. She told us that she ended up in this new place because she had to undergo rehabilitation after a car accident in which her husband had died, and she had also suffered a miscarriage. She was incredibly nice, and I got along well with her. However, some of her actions raised doubts about the accuracy of her story. After some investigation, I discovered that her husband hadn't died in a car accident, but had been shot and robbed. After a drag deal, he had come home with several million in a sports bag. She didn't want the bag in the house and sent him off with it. When he got into his car, he was riddled with bullets and died instantly. Her husband was the son of a notorious cocaine and heroin dealer wanted by Interpol. After 6 weeks, they also attempted to shoot her, which led to her being placed in a safe house, and she began rehabilitation in our city. At that time, my relationship with her was very good. I then made the choice to go to her one evening and tell her that I knew who she was and that she was still in danger. I didn't want to carry this secret, but I felt it was only fair to let her know that I was aware of it. She seemed relieved that her secret could now be shared with someone. However, I slowly let the contact with her fade away. I grew up in a similar environment, and I have a child now. Even though I was safe, I didn't want to expose my child to any risks. Her story is currently a series that can be streamed. Story 11. My best friend's dad ate a shotgun about 20 years ago after his wife left him. I wasn't there when the cops found and removed the body, but I did help clean up the crime scene, because nobody tells you that you're responsible for that, and crime scene cleanup crews are expensive, and prep the house for sale. My friend and his family went through therapy for a while, and then they moved across the country to be closer to his mom's friends, but we kept in touch. A few years ago, they temporarily moved back into the area before settling in a neighboring state, and I helped them with the move. My friend hadn't arrived yet, so it was just me helping, basically a second mom, and when we stopped for lunch, she pretty much told me everything. Her ex-husband had been extremely abusive, but was really good at hiding it, so it took her over a decade to get out. The dad had bought a shotgun, updated the beneficiaries on his own life insurance policy, and took out policies on mom and all 3 of their kids, naming the aunt as beneficiary on all policies. He ate the shotgun a couple of weeks later. We think he had a last-minute change of heart about killing his kids, but we'll never know. They're all grown, some with families of their own, and they are quite happy as they are, so I don't think it will do any good to tell any of them, and I have no intentions of doing, so their mom can, if she wants. Story 12. I live in California, and in 2016/2017, I used to take Ubers all the time to buy weed from one of the dispensaries, before they had the completely legal ones, and people tell you some crazy things when A. They know they'll never encounter you again, and B. They find out you don't mind towing the legal line, using loopholes to get an otherwise illegal thing. I would normally set the ride up to be there, and then back to my apartment, and most of the time, as soon as I got in the car, I'd tell them where we're going just in case they weren't comfortable giving me a ride after. None of them ever had an issue with it. I had a lot of old guys that would start talking about how they used to smoke a lot back in the day, and bring up other minor illicit activities of theirs. There was this one guy in particular, though. He was an older guy, who on the way back to my apartment, he asks if he can smell what I got. I hand him the capsule of weed I just bought. He opens it and takes a big whiff. He starts reminiscing out loud to me, but not just about weed, about hard stuff, how he used to sell it. He brings up something I felt he should have kept to himself. He tells me him and a buddy of his were set to meet someone to either buy or sell some hard stuff to. They arrive at the motel with their half and head to the room. He says upon entering the room the guy they're supposed to meet with is there already. He's dead, apparently still with his half of the trade in the room with him, so my Uber driver and his friend decide to leave with both halves, their own and the dead guy's. They never heard anything about it after. Now I had so many questions like how did this guy they were there to meet with seem to have died? Was this someone they dealt with before? Just how large of a deal was this? And why the F are you telling me? My only conclusion is the story was either completely made up by him on the spot, or this guy has just had this on his conscience for so long, building up, that he felt the need to get it out to someone. Someone he felt he'd never see again, and was at least just barely, even if only a sliver, a part of that underworld. Story 12. Okay, so this is a lot, so I apologize in advance. When I was in my early 20s and living in Houston, I was heavily addicted to cocaine, and in order to pay for it, I would go to script doctors and sell the pills they gave. When Hurricane Katrina hit, Houston was flooded with refugees from Louisiana, and there was one particular apartment complex that seemed to have only been filled with New Orleans gang members and street prostitutes. I would say that roughly 70% of the people living in these apartments sold crack and powder cocaine, so I got to know quite a few of them, and would either sell or trade my pills for their hard drags. All of the people living there scared the shit out of me. It was an easy process. I would walk up to the apartment gate, stand there a few minutes, and someone would come up and ask me if I wanted anything. I would then ask them the same thing, and next thing I know the transaction was complete. Every time I went it would be someone new. The last time I ever went I was approached by a black guy with long hair, driving a Cadillac convertible. He was in his early 20s and asked me the same question everyone else asked. When I told him what I had, he told me to come with up to his apartment to get more for the trade. I said okay and followed him through the complex. We went through building after building until finally coming to the very last building on the property, which seemed to be empty. When we got to the second floor I saw nothing but caution tape on all the doors and a partially caved-in roof at the end of the hall. I watched as he went to one of the doors, pulled out a key, and opened the apartment. I was shocked someone lived in this environment, but had seen worse, so I decided to follow him in. We started talking about the trade and working out a deal for future transactions. We finally settled on a deal where I would go to 2 doctors a week for him, and he would supply my addiction to me. I went to a doctor a day every week, so it was a great deal for me. He paid the $120 doc visit, paid for prescriptions, and gave me drugs. Then I would still have 5 more doc visits a week where I just made profit on the pills sold. After the deal was made, he told me to wait in the apartment while he went next door for the coke. Then he walked out the door and locked the handle. After about 15 minutes I got restless and went to let myself out, but when I tried the door I found that I was locked in. He had taken over this abandoned apartment and changed the lock to only lock from the outside. I started to freak the F out. I tried every room to see if I could leave, and when I went to the second bedroom, I was greeted by a girl dressed in a dirty yellow sundress. She was white, about 19 years old, and absolutely filthy. She told me to relax, and that he would be back eventually, and just to have a seat until he is. There's so much more, but I'm trying to shorten as best I can so y'all don't have to read too much. We started talking, and I asked her where she was from, and asked about Katrina. Basic small talk. For some reason, she begins to tell me how she ended up on the street. Here's what she said. When she was a sophomore in high school, she started dating a guy who was about 20 years old. He was pretty abusive and would fill her up with substances, but she stayed with him. One day he picked her up from school, and on the way home they saw one of her classmates walking. They pulled up to her and offered a ride. Apparently she didn't get along too well with the one telling me this story, but they eventually convinced her to go with them. Also, they were headed the same direction, because they lived only a few houses away from the girl. The boyfriend had been drinking, and offered the girl a drink. She said no, which irritated the boyfriend, who then hit the girl across her face with a vodka bottle. He then pulled down a side road, beat her face multiple more times, attacked her, and then ended her. Then they took the girl's body and buried it in an area behind the dead girl's house. She told me all this in the calmest way possible, like it was nothing. She then said that her and her boyfriend never went back to her actual house. Had not seen her parents in years. I then realized who locked me in the apartment. Eventually he came back, and I asked if he wanted to take me to a doctor that day. He said he would, and we left. When he stopped for gas, I said I'd pay and walked in the store, and then out the opposite doors. I then ran into an adult bookstore where I paid to go into the theater that was there. I then hid inside a booth for 8 hours until they kicked me out. I walked home constantly looking over my shoulder. I never went back to that apartment complex. Story 13. I rented a room from an older guy, Rob, in the late 1980s in college. Rob. He was a super cool dude. He was a Vietnam vet and had that air of someone who had seen some stuff. He was a nurse at a local hospital and worked an early shift. Great guy. Knew tons of stuff. Everyone in our little neighborhood liked and appreciated him. I could go to the local Irish pub and get in without an ID because everyone there knew I was his housemate. Rob was also an extremely high-functioning alcoholic. He would get completely blasted every single evening, but be up and sober and out of the house by 5 a.m. for his shift. Never saw him drink during the day. At the end of the school year, I had just finished all my finals and papers and was getting ready to head out for a study year abroad in a few days. That evening, Rob asked if I wanted to celebrate with him. We started with a bottle of Jameson about 3/4 full. About 4 drinks in, Rob started to go into his inebriated side. In the year that I'd lived with him, he never spoke about Vietnam, and I knew better than to ask. But that evening he asked if I wanted to know what he did there. I had always assumed he was a nurse or medic there, or had just been a regular GI who had done the usual horrible war stuff. Turns out he was part of the Phoenix program. Basically, he was sent into North Vietnam on CIA assassination missions. He was a sniper. A lot of his targets seemed to be civilians. He said he drank because he saw the faces of the people he killed every evening. He also said a lot of other stuff that I don't remember, for obvious reasons. Anyway, we ended up polishing off the bottle that night. The next morning I heard him get up and out of the house at 5 a.m. I spent the entire day alternating between praying to the porcelain god and curling up in a fetal position on my futon. We never spoke of it again. Story 14. My dad was in a reconnaissance unit in the Army. He arrived in April 1968. Bad time to be there, but it's never good in a recon unit because it's so dangerous. Like 9 guys going first to go find the enemy. They call the troops in, good lord. Anyway, he was 18, fucked him up good. I was scared to death of him growing up, but really, I have to hand it to the guy. He went to work every day, never complained, and we were poor, but he always made sure we were fed and warm. However, his PTSD was brutal, and he didn't have the skill set to deal with it when he was younger, and it made for a very rough childhood for me. However, now he gets therapy and other services they Veterans Affairs, and he doesn't have those negative behaviors anymore, other than the functional alcoholic thing. But he is 76, won't drive after drinking, he is responsible about it, and that man really saw some shit. I figure, let him have his beer. We have a really great relationship now, and I am grateful for the work he put in to work through a lot of his demons. War really sucks. He has told me some objectively horrific stories and makes it clear that what he can't say out loud, those stories are much, much worse. He said he has tried to talk to his therapist about them, and he opens his mouth to speak, and the words won't come out. He said it's super weird. No one is really built for seeing that kind of shit, but damn, at 18, 19, 20? Like, you haven't even lived yet, and you are seeing the stuff of nightmares. It's no wonder people get so messed up by it. Story 15. My great-grandma had dementia in her last years of life and completely forgot English. She would mumble and confess as German, and eventually my grandma, and I learned some really dark stuff about Oma. Took a lot of time and a German to English dictionary in the 1990s. 1. Her oldest son's father died during the Battle of Stalingrad while she was pregnant with said first child. This is husband number 1, died September 1942. 2. She married husband number 1's brother after giving birth to son number 1. She soon became pregnant with daughter 1. When husband 2 went to fight for the Nazis, husband 2 died during the Battle of Kursk in July of 1943. 3. Great-grandma gave birth to daughter number 1 and then married husband number 1 and 2's cousin. Husband 3 and her were expecting child 3, my grandmother, when he went to fight in the Battle of Hurtgen Forest. Husband 3 died in November of 1944. He was her favorite husband apparently. At this point there are no men in the area who will marry her, and she is considered cursed. For with 3 children under the age of 4 in tow, great-grandma managed to get her ass smuggled to the U.S., specifically to L.A. during the last few months of World War II. She never gave complete details, but we figure she probably bribed, smuggled, and murdered her way out of all that BS. 5. Upon coming to the U.S. in 1945, great-grandma married the man my grandma and her siblings thought was their dad, but it turns out he was majorly gay and paid great-grandma to be his beard. He died of a heart attack in 1960, and great-grandma never remarried. 6. Somehow my grandma, great-aunt, and great-uncle all have birth certificates stating they were born in the U.S. and that husband 4 was their father. We have no clue how great-grandma pulled that one off. Story 16. My wife is not the biological mother of our twins. We did IVF, and their biological mother was an egg donor from a country in South America. My wife carried them and gave birth to them, but has no biological connection. We'll tell them someday when they're older. It's a little bit strange, but one looks exactly like me at that age, and the other one looks very much like my brother. Edit. I can't believe that this blew up so big. My highest rated comment is about a family secret. Thanks to everyone for all the great advice about letting the cat out of the bag to our twins. Comments from people in this situation were especially helpful. Comments about the biological aspects were very helpful and educational. For anyone wondering, our twins are 8.5 years old, and my side of the family has known the truth from a time long before the procedure occurred. For whatever reason my wife decided to tell her family that she was the egg donor, I the sperm donor, and that we did IVF because we were older and needed medical help to get her preggers. I never understood why, but went along with it because it was what she wanted. I will broach the subject when my wife gets back in country from a long work trip. Thanks again to the people of Reddit for helping to open my eyes about the impact of waiting too long to tell our kids the truth. Story 17. I don't want my son to know that he was an unwanted accident. Even during my pregnancy, I didn't want a child. I was still so young and had my whole career ahead of me. I wanted to travel the world, finish school, and advance myself in life to the fullest. After he was born, I had a hard time adjusting, and it took me a long time to fall in love with motherhood. I didn't feel a connection to my son, and felt like the worst mother in the world. Now, I can't stop looking at him, or hugging him, or crying over him. I'm finishing school, and I got promoted at my job. I can have my life, and still be a mother too. I only regret my feeling of not wanting my son, because he means so much to me, and there are no words to describe the deep love that I feel for him. I love my son very much that I can't wait to get home and hug him. I love watching him grow, and I want to provide him the best life possible. It's hard to manage work and family home life, and I'm not perfect by any means, but I'm doing my best. Thank you again, everyone. If any other parents want to talk, please don't hesitate to contact me. As to why I didn't choose abortion, before he was born or conceived I was diagnosed with PCOS and had a slim chance of getting pregnant due to the state of my ovaries. I wanted a child, but I didn't want one at that moment. We were not mentally, at least I felt that I wasn't, ready for a child. I wanted a child later in my life. When we found out I was pregnant, we considered abortion. I was scared of everything, carrying the baby, giving birth, having the abortion, the guilt, the regret. A lot of emotions and thought went into this pregnancy. I decided to go through with the pregnancy. So it was my own fault for keeping him, but I don't regret my decision. I had support and friends and family all around me during and after. I even had a friend who admitted she had felt the same way I did after giving birth.